All right. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. This is Kristen Vincent, Chair of the Westborough School Committee. Today is Wednesday, December 16th, 2020. I call the meeting of the Westborough School Committee to order. Thank you for joining us this evening at this remote live stream school committee meeting. Due to the impacts of the COVID-19 virus, some aspects of the open meeting law have been suspended. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Westborough School Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceeding as provided for in the order. Town officials and Westborough TV have worked together to hold this meeting via televideo conference and broadcast it as such on Westborough TV's government channels, Verizon 28 and Charter 192, and streamed online on the Westborough TV YouTube channel for persons who would like to listen to or view this meeting while in progress. Any votes we take this evening will be roll call votes due to the remote participation. If you would like to speak at a school committee meeting during the citizens request portion of the meeting, please email your requests to school-committee@westboroughk12.org. Thank you to Westborough TV for covering the broadcast tonight. And as a reminder, a recording of this meeting can be accessed from the Westborough TV website or YouTube channel at any time. We have with us tonight Superintendent Amber Bach, Assistant Superintendent Dr. Daniel Mayer, Director of Finance and Administration Irene Oliver, Steve Durrett, Vice Chair, Westborough School Committee, School Committee members Sarah Dulé, Lisa Edinburgh, and Raghu Nandan, our Student Representative Kyla Kamubu, our Recording Secretary Jen Benton. We have Bob and Kelly from our Buildings and Grounds Department, and we have staff from Westborough TV handling the live stream and recording of this meeting. Our agenda for tonight is as follows. We will begin with an approval of minutes from December 2nd, 2020 regular session. We'll have the superintendent's report and reports from the assistant superintendent and director of finance and administration. Then we will have school committee member reports, building projects update, citizens requests, but we don't have any tonight. Then we'll have a COVID-19 impact update that includes a data dashboard review and a COVID grants update. Then we will have a discussion and vote on the 2021-2022 budget. We will look quickly at a budget timeline update leading up to annual town meeting. We will look at some warrant articles that involves capital projects and a warrant article about salary coverage. We will review and approve an update to policy JIH about searches and interrogations, and then we will adjourn for the night and for the year. So we will begin with an approval of our minutes from December 2nd, 2020 regular session. Is there a motion?
I can make a motion to approve the minutes from December 2nd.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion about those minutes? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Sarah?
Julie, yes.
Raghu?
Nandan, yes.
Lisa?
Edinburgh, yes.
Steve?
Right, yes.
And Vincent, yes, 5-0. The minutes are approved. Thank you. So we will turn it over to Amber for our superintendent's report.
Thank you. It's good to see all of you. And we're waiting on our snow arrival, and I have some updates to share with you. So I just want to give out some celebrations to student volunteering, community volunteering, some collections that have been done, and just a lot of good community spirit during a time when there's been, again, the challenges that everybody is facing during the pandemic. We have a group called Covering All Forces, which is actually a club at the high school. And when I pushed out the note about the collection for our veterans for the Worcester organization, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I got a really nice email from the student who's one of the organizing members of that club and just shared some good news with me that last year they had donated 50 tie-based no-sew blankets, and they were donating tomorrow or on Friday, they're delivering 50 blankets to this same vets organization. And the group actually, they did some fundraising and they did some outreach to get donations to get the funds for the materials. And then they held weekly Zoom meetings where they did blanket tying while they visited with each other remotely to stick with the goals of their service-based work. And I just think it really speaks to the quality of our Westborough students that the innovations to still serve are there, and there's so much creative work going on we often don't even know. And so that was a nice email to get. We had a very successful gift wrap collection to be able to contribute gift wrap to the Youth and Family Services donation of gift cards instead of gifts this year to families in need. I think they were serving over 100 families, and they were able to each get 2 rolls of gift wrap and some ribbon and things. And that really would just give them what they needed to head out with their gift cards and to be able to provide for their families. And that was also a really nice collaboration. On Sunday, I was able to attend a very successful town-based school drive, which was organized by the police and fire and invited us. It was called Handcuff Hunger, and an organization, kind of a theme that Jeff Laurie and Pat Purcell collaborated on, invited the schools. I had a great time. We were at the Stop and Shops and Roach Brothers. People were literally bringing out not just like 1 or 2 donations, but bags of groceries. Some women, like, they brought out their whole cart, and then they would take out their bag and like give us the cart of groceries. People were so generous. And so the collection was very, very successful and will be used to serve a pop-up food bank on December 27th at the senior center. And so we'll be working to push out that information and make sure that families know in our community that we are there for them, and that the senior center will host this pop-up food bank on the 27th after the holiday to make sure that families continue to have the food they need. Really fun event. I have to say, it was good to be out there talking with people. And then after we did the gift wrap and we had just collected it, I quickly called the principals back and said, well, just swap the name on your box because now we're going to do the vets collection. So I had gotten a call from the vets board to see if we would be willing to put out the all call to get some support for the Worcester Veterans Organization Incorporated. They serve over 100 homeless and needy vets, and they need all array of food, clothes, and gift cards. And so we're participating in that right now. And then Friday, we'll coordinate with helping the Vets Organization in Westborough, which is very active and a really great group, to deliver those to Worcester. So really just the feeling of the season remains, and people are really finding ways to step up. So that's my report for tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful to hear about all the generosity happening around our town. Daniel, do you have anything to share tonight as an update?
One thing that I did want to bring to your attention, just as a inform, we got a memo from the Commissioner's Office of the Department of Education for the state of Massachusetts last Friday about time on learning standards that they're basically grappling at the state level with requirements that they want districts to follow. And the memo, it caught us a little bit by surprise. I will say we were asked for data back in November, on November 2nd. And the reason I'm telling you this is so that this committee's not surprised if the data becomes public. There's an error in the data, but we filled out the survey in Westborough's data. We filled out the survey on November 2nd and handed it in. And after a month and a half on Friday, last Friday, they sent us an email that truthfully didn't raise to our attention until this Wednesday because
That's
of
so
other things.
nice. I didn't give it to Daniel. I'm going to take credit. I was sitting in my email box. So
nevertheless, I mean, for the state, I'm actually saying the state had it for a month and a half and then gave us until today at 5 to notify them if there were errors.
That's kind.
I did contact the state at 2:30 today, at which point they gave me a portal to submit my errors, but didn't say, remember this, you have to get this in by 5. I thought I needed to notify them by 5. A long-winded way of saying, if the state comes out with data in the next week or two about our time on learning, I am not clear whether they will have our updated data or the old data. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. So before, if you start getting communication from people in the community about the data doesn't seem to match our model, I just want you to know that I wouldn't be surprised that the state didn't, doesn't have the right data when they go public. But we are doing much of the districts across the state. We're doing very similar amounts of work in terms of time and learning as other districts, and the state's trying to, with good reason, get a handle on what that looks like. I just want to make sure that before I resubmit and clean it up, I have appropriate conversations with my principals about the data so that they feel comfortable with what's released to the public.
No, I agree. And I think that to say that the onslaught of information from the state, we basically sift through those that rise to the top and don't. And so that one usually comes to both of us, and it came to me. So it's on me that I held it. And so I think that we will certainly respond, but I think it's very interesting. I just want to be clear, like the state is, blanketing a perspective. And I think superintendents are grappling with the fact that aspects of this seem interrupting to what we're facing, and kind of coming at a time. First of all, the timing is very bad, and the requests are very concrete and very clear when we had no concrete and no clear in the fall, in ways that I think are challenging to modify plans now. So I think we'll be fine. I have a lot of confidence that we're fine, to Daniel's point. But I think that, we want to work it through, and we'll keep you updated.
Yeah, the last thing I would say on this is I think that the state is particularly concerned, with good reason, about districts that are high poverty districts where the students, they're having trouble at getting large swaths of their students to actively participate in the learning process from a distance. And so that's not what's happening here in Westborough. And I understand why the state's trying to get a handle on that. That's it.
Okay, thanks for the heads up.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll get on that as soon as you can. It's only so many hours in a day. Thank you. Irene, do you have anything to share with us right now?
Nothing this evening.
Okay.
No.
Okay, thanks. So I'll turn it over to Kyla. Do you have any reports for us from the schools?
Yes, I did. The principals gracefully answered my email, so I will just read you what they sent to me. So I wanted to start by talking about the donations and all of that, but the superintendent beat me to it. So in Fails, they had a hedgehog family music night with over 50 participants, and they were also collecting things for the donation, most specifically the Westborough Food Pantry. And they do have a book of the month, which is Let's Celebrate Special Days Around the World, which is pretty cute. And at Hastings, they launched a new charter education plan for Hastings called Hastings Has Heart, where each letter has like a different meaning. And at Westborough High School, we're just trying to get back to the fully remote program, and things seem to be going pretty well. So that's my report.
Thank you. Thanks. I know those couple cold mask break days going on over there at the high school, but I think it's still working out. So thanks. I'll turn over to Sarah. Do you have anything to share tonight?
I don't have anything this evening. Everyone covered everything.
Yeah. Raghu, anything?
No, not today.
Okay,
Thanks.
thanks. Lisa?
I just wanted to wish everyone happy holidays, and more importantly, a safe, restful winter break for teachers, families, and staff. I hope that this is a respite for most and a safe one. And I also wanted to remind people that the community ed programs, their brochure came out. So certainly lots of activities for all different ages, including adults and young children. And finally, I wanted to mention something about how there was a Google global outage, which did draw me to have a great concern considering that we have tremendous we rely heavily on our technology. And some people had texted me different possibilities in the future. So I just wanted to put it out in my reports that let's say there was no Gmail for 80% of the country or Google Classroom. There are ways to communicate, which people brought up to me, and I wanted to bring up that Remind app is a way to communicate without using Google or different types of technology that could be down. So in the future, we might want to think about what ways could we deal with when there could be such a possibility. That's all. Enjoy the break, and we'll see you next year after this meeting.
Thank you, Lisa. I don't have anything to report out tonight, so I'm going to turn it directly over to Steve, so Steve can share any building project updates he might have.
Yeah, well, we had a weekly construction meeting today in regards to Fails. What's going on right this minute is the receiving on the site additional materials for doing the walls. The north wall of the school second floor will start to have sheathing on it shortly. They're working on the roof on the north area as well. They're doing blocking for windows, that is the framing for the windows in the same area. They received the material to do the framing for the south wall. That will start next week. And so, the building will start to look quite a bit different pretty soon. So far, so good as far as the schedule is concerned. And obviously tomorrow with the snow coming, there'll be a very light crew. And most of the workers who are there will be dealing with the snow with hopefully the ability to get it cleaned up enough to go back to work on Friday. So that's my story for this week. But things are moving along as far as Fails are concerned.
Good
I
to
guess
hear.
speaking of technology, I have not been able to get onto the Zoom meeting. I am communicating with you by Ma Bell.
The old-fashioned telephone.
There you go.
Great. Okay, I'm glad you could join us even by phone. And we've been very lucky at Fails with the weather, and so we'll deal with the snowstorm as it comes. But that's winter in New England, right?
Yep.
Okay. Next on our agenda is citizens' requests, but we don't have any tonight. So we will move on to our COVID-19 impact update, and we'll kind of talk about the data we've collected and COVID grants update. So I'll turn it over to Amber.
So just a couple focus areas. I think it's important that the public hear us and that you continue to get an update on our implementation. I think that the news around the good news, I think there is good news that our effort to do the remote 2 weeks post Thanksgiving was, I think, a sound decision. I think people's feelings that I pushed out a memo today that indicated a number of increased cases that had occurred during vacation, and those students had not been in school, didn't impact us in terms of needing to quarantine or coming to school where we would have detected illness later. And that was a good implementation outcome. We did have a couple cases where we've picked up a couple students this week that have been positive. And I think there was a cycle of quarantining that happened today at Mill Pond and Gibbons, which is unfortunate. I think it's very, very important that we emphasize, and I can't emphasize enough for all of us, that the protocols aren't just being restated by me for the act of doing it. I think it's essential that families and faculty follow the guidelines. And I think if you've tested your child, they need to stay home until you get your results. So, I think there was some frustration if they feel that people are sending their kids when they've should have held them at home. And I think the impact is that, again, there's two. The impact is that then people need to quarantine. I want to be clear about this. I think this is an important update. That does not mean that we're at a place where our practices are unsafe. It actually means that the inconvenience and the structure of quarantine has a lot of impact on the family. I recognize that. But what we aren't seeing is any increase in illness or spread in our schools. And I think that's an important difference. I think when people see that we need to quarantine, they're concerned that, oh, there's an increase of things are changing. And actually what it means is our protocols are sound. We've continued to use that cycle. And we had 2 cases this week where we needed to then send people home to quarantine. The other release of case information did not have impact at a school level because people were at home, or they knew to stay home after they had symptoms, and people are following their protocols, and we're safely able to see that at the school level that we aren't seeing transmissions that occur from cases that become known to us. And I think that's important. So we sent some emails today where some families had texted us to say that they were concerned that there had been quarantining, and with the increase in numbers where we're going to change our practice, were we going to move to remote or anything like that? And my answer to the families that I had emailed back was no. Actually, the quarantining and the cycle of people returning, not coming up positive, is indicative that our structure is working. And that doesn't mean that we take it lightly. We don't want to have to quarantine people. We understand it's an inconvenience and it breaks the cycle for students, for school, and for family plans in terms of daycare and things. And so we take it very seriously. I do anticipate that we will look, the CDC has shifted to the 10-day as opposed to 14, which, we will implement most likely post vacation, and we'll put out some communications on that. The safety committee is currently discussing it. But we have followed the CDC guidelines as our framework, and therefore as they update theirs, we've updated ours, and that the 10-day cycle would support families and faculty not being held at home an inordinate amount of time when there's been no indication of illness and they're just quarantining as a safety protocol. So I think that all of these things are working effectively. The only thing that works is if families follow their protocols, to be honest. So if your child has symptoms, they need to stay home. If your child has been tested, you need to keep them home until you get a result. You're not to interpret whether or not they should come to school. If you've taken them to be tested, you need to keep them at home. Those are the kind of things that will keep things moving forward in positive ways. I was in schools this week. Students were very happy to be back. They're enjoying their return to hybrid because their remote model was not what they chose, and they really feel that they don't learn as effectively at home. And there was a lot of positive connection with students who are really very happy to be back in-person learning. So we will continue to sustain our effort. And I do believe it's good news, continues to be good news that, the implementation seems to be working, even though it's complicated. So I guess I would open it up to questions. And if you feel that I said something that needs to be clarified or would confuse people, we should make sure we, clear it up. But I hope that's, a clear update.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to all of our nurses who are working to do all the contact tracing, and even are available all hours to answer questions. Obviously nervous parents calling, family members, just trying to get additional information. It's confusing about, what to do, and there's some fear. And I just want to thank the nurses so much for answering everyone's questions, so knowledgeable. Everyone feels taken care of by our nurses. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I want to also provide a shout out to the way the circle works, because I think it's important for you guys to understand, as you've stayed really close to this, but when we get a call from the Board of Health or the nurse or from a family, the protocol that goes into action is that somebody opens up a spreadsheet, they drop in all the cycle of names, they call the teachers, everybody pulls out their class lists, they look at the cycle of their schedule, they look at the contacts. It's a mini circle of an effort that's like basically a mini emergency protocol implementation. So your principal, your nurse, the teachers all snap into gear. I get contacted. I draft my update. I work with the principal to make sure their update follows. So, we take it very, very seriously, and everybody has done an incredible job to stay very tight on it. So thank you.
So can I ask a quick question or also make a statement just from what I'm hearing from parents, which is about, it's really, the comments I keep receiving are mainly about students that have been quarantined because they have become a close contact with someone who, and this is prior to Thanksgiving, where they received a 14-day quarantine. They took a test, were found negative, but they had been a close contact and need to stay in that 14-day quarantine. And the issue really is about their mental health by not being able to go into school for 4 of their in-person days. That, and then the protocol for receiving work and synchronous work, meaning that you're not receiving any instruction from a in-person, even remote teacher, and how they're receiving that work, when does it come, how will they catch up? Those are the concerns I'm hearing about. And because that 14-day quarantine also puts them into quarantine for all other activities beyond school.
Right.
And that's the disconcerting part emotionally for some of our kids who really need that kind of either academic support or emotional support when that happens.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, I think that's a very insightful comment. I think that the shortening to the 10-day window provides an opportunity to lessen that burden. And then I also think that, we continue to look at ways we can tweak the protocols so we limit the number of people that have to quarantine. I think, again, they also want to be cautious because then we have maintained a safe environment. So, I think that the quarantining circles are accurate to what needs to occur. And we're always looking at ways we can improve distancing and different things to keep it, manageable and limit quarantining. But we're looking forward to finalizing the 10-day as opposed to the 14.
Just going off what Ms. Edinburgh said, they're not in school for 14 days and they're expected to do their work. There should be a clear system on how they get their work because following the Google Classrooms that they're already in, they would get confused because they're not there when they're discussing about the work. So there should be a way or some kind of protocol where they're receiving the work that they're expected to do so that it doesn't affect their grades.
Other comments and updates? I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, I think our staff, again, take it very seriously getting students what they need. I think that they also, are looking for ways to increase. Again, we have a makeup cycle, which we've always used when students are out sick, and they're utilizing that same protocol for the days missed. And that's an unsatisfying response, right? And I recognize that. So if you're out for 2 weeks with a flu, or you're out because you broke your leg, or you traveled, or, when you come back, the protocol is very clear at high school and at Gibbons and at actually all of our schools, that for the number of days you're out, you get that number of days to make up. Now they're missing the in-person, they're not missing the away day. So it shortens the cycle. And I'm not offering this as an example to say that it's easy. So please don't misunderstand me. I'm actually saying they recognize the complexity of it, and the layers of additional planning they can do are also limited given that they're already planning some complex cycles of how the work comes forward. But Daniel and I also will, again, take this feedback, and we got it through the survey as well. And faculty are talking about the things they can do. And that's one of the reasons why the safety committee looks at the 10-day as something that they're willing to consider. So I think all of it, to Kyla and Lisa's comments, are aimed at continuing to look towards this next phase of our year, January forward, and everything we can do to continue to improve the model. So that's great feedback. Thank you.
I do wonder if there's a possibility of counselors reaching out to those kids. It's one of those, what feels different about breaking your leg or getting the flu is that you broke your leg, you got the flu. The difference is being the unlucky, unfortunate person who happened to be sitting behind the person who happened to get COVID in their history class feels so unfortunate, and sort of this loss that's different from I'm homesick. And I guess that, and kids who struggle anyway, it seems like a greater grief that seems to be affecting kids. And it's understandable that teachers who are really doing double duty right now, it's hard to have the capacity to also accommodate the kids who are in quarantine. So I sort of recognize at the same time that teachers are completely, busy. And how do you accommodate for these kids who suddenly have this loss of academic support in person that suddenly is gone for 2 weeks? And yes, the 10-day would help, but I'm wondering if there is some kind of, counselor outreach just to make sure they're okay, with what's happening. And, when I think about the high school, the pressures that students feel about being able to keep up with the work without direct instruction, when I think about kids at Mill Pond or elementary or Gibbons feeling, different aspects of learning that are lost, it must be different all around. And I don't know if there's a way to gather support in some way. I think it would be really helpful.
No, I hear you. I mean, I see Daniel nodding as well. I mean, I think these are the active discussions we're having in the circles of leadership as we continue to look at working with the department heads and the different teams to kind of step back, take the feedback, look where we are, adjust the model, and continue to do things that improve it as we look towards the second half of the year. We also have to stay open. So nobody will be there if we close. So I just want to say that. I mean, I want to remind everyone, the only way we do any of this is if we stay open. And the way we stay open is by quarantining circles that could put us at risk. So we're between a rock and a hard place, and we're going to do everything we can to continue to provide strong instruction. And everything we hear from our students and our faculty teaching in that model is they feel it's going well despite these challenges. And I think we need to continue to just do what we can to tweak and improve them. So, I mean, Daniel and I hear you, and we'll carry the information back. So thank you.
Thanks. I think we can move on to the COVID grants update.
So I'll turn it over to Irene if she would like to provide any kind of general guidance on how she's progressing against the major grants that we're working on. You'll have to unmute, Irene.
Sorry about that. So we do have the COVID grants, the COVID reopening grant. We fully have expended that. And so it's been a great deal of reconciling that and shifting of funding and encumbering of funds and making sure that it's appropriate on the grant. So I did put in an amendment 2 days ago, and it looks like it's been recognized as appropriate. So we should be good with that, shifting funds up and down different budget line items. And there's also the CARES grant that the town manages, which is a reimbursement grant. So anything now going forward that would possibly be on our reopening grant would be shifted over to this other grant with the town. So it's a lot of coordination with the town to make sure that our funding and the appropriate of the funding that we put forward, like the PPE, will get reimbursed. So it's very different from the grant we got directly. So we get the funding, and then we just get, we are paid automatically on a quarterly basis, whereas the town gets funded based upon what they submit, and then the state audits it and sees if that's appropriate, and then gets reimbursed back to the coffers, so to speak. So there's a lot of coordination that we need to do with the town to make sure that everything is coordinated appropriately. But I can tell you, there's a lot of PPE stacked up in our facilities department to make sure everyone's got masks and gloves and all of that. And so the funding for that either is on this grant that I'm the reopening grant, or the town grant is reimbursed for. So there's also, and I don't know, Amber, if you want me to talk about the $130,000 grant at this point with the proposal with the state, or just,
Why don't you wait until we come down to the salary coverage article? It
Okay,
seems more
okay.
relevant to fit it into there.
okay.
I think but the submission for the CARES grant and the closure of that grant is supposed to be expended and encumbered by December 31st. So Irene and Leah and the town and our side, everybody's working to complete those allocations and encumbrances such that we can submit and then hopefully get reimbursed for those. And so now that, as Irene said, the one grant is fully expended, and that was up around 800,000 plus, that's fully expended with salaries and the types of things that we could carry against that. Everything else will spill over to the CARES grant. So that's where she's currently looking at moving or encumbering the majority of those expenditures. We still have exposures on parts where in the second half of the year we don't have coverages, and we'll talk about that when we come down to the salary article. Thank you, Irene.
You're welcome.
All right, any questions about the grants?
I guess the one question I have is, beyond salary, do we foresee other COVID expenses in 2021, January to June, that we haven't pre-supplied? As you just described, PPE is in our storage, and we were using the CARES grant, we were using the one grant. Are there other expenses we haven't foreseen besides the salaries, which you're going to be talking about later, that are coming? I just want to feel a little more prepared as I think about it.
I would love to feel prepared. I haven't felt prepared all year. What do you mean?
I mean, that's true. Like
that's a great feeling. I'd love to have that in a pandemic. We're at this place where we've done everything we can to anticipate, and you guys have helped us do that in our thinking and our planning. We've looked at cost impacts. I mean, if you were to pick an area where something could blow up in terms of cost, would be transportation. Let's take an example like that, where, we might have some need to transport students in order to meet some criteria of something that we hadn't anticipated. I don't think that will happen. We've tried to basically do scenario mapping. We are budgeted for the things we need to do to run the district currently. And I think the exposure is mostly on salary. I don't think so, Lisa, but again, if something came up that was unanticipated, we would need to either make other cuts or make other plans, or we would bring it forward at town meeting. At this point, I'm not seeing anything. And I think Irene and I have gone through it multiple times looking for anything that, we might not have anticipated. As of now, I hope not.
I mean, so for, an example, if at some point you thought you had enough spacing for kindergarten or first grade, you would need obviously more busing space if that criteria hadn't changed, meaning you still could only have one student per bus. Have we calculated those kinds of, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but
right.
If you were to foresee any changes in the future that would cause.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I am foreseeing changes and things that we think we might try moving into the second half of the year. And right now we have savings on transportation that we would leverage. So the only thing that would happen is you'd let's say you'd end up fully expending that other 20% of your busing that right now you didn't tap into, that's already budgeted, that they, expect us to expend. Now, Irene is hoping not, because she thinks that would help us. That's why we have to do the salary warrant article, because we're not going to necessarily have any savings. Like last year we had savings we could leverage against some other, unanticipated costs. We wouldn't have that, but I would anticipate that if we ran into something with transportation is a good example. Because let's say I did a second run to bring in, kids, yes, that would be, or ran more late buses to keep like kids come in and do stuff, that type of stuff. I'm assuming right now we would leverage the offset of the funds we haven't paid yet. But Irene and I haven't run those numbers.
Yep.
But I know those funds are there. So, that's the type of thing where it's kind of loosely planned and then we would prepare based upon that.
And the other thing that I might add is that the company that we're contracted with right now is willing to, be more, forgiving of some of those things and willing to like do meal deliveries and that type of thing. So they seem like they're willing to negotiate. So
Right. Because they
something
want
in the
to,
future that we can think about. Yes.
they want to bill us for those hours. It's logical, of course. I mean, they want to expend those funds and they want to build a relationship with us because they've been very committed, as Irene said. So I think we're leveraged for that as of now. Those are the kinds of exposures that, we might have an idea. And if we can't do it because of finances, then we wouldn't do it.
Right. I mean, so, as people start to talk about the landscape changing in the spring, they're already talking about the landscape changing in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Have we foreseen, have we done some kind of, extrapolating of what our expenses might be based upon how the landscape would change based upon safety protocols and would something change?
Yeah, and I don't think we have to go into it in depth tonight.
No.
It's certainly a January discussion, but the only thing that breaks down the structure of where we are that would change our implementation is if the CDC collapsed the 3-foot guideline. So until that action happens, and that's what schools are waiting for, you won't see a substantive change in implementation, I don't think, because unless you can increase returning kids as long as you can follow that guideline, but you reach a saturation where you can't. And so you're going to be where they are until they change that guideline. That's per that MOU, it's per our agreement, and it's per our hope to maintain staying open and to stay safe. So I don't foresee, yes, I mean, if the landscape changes, the only major change would be they would negate that boundary and say people could come back to school full time. If that happened, then we'd all be coming back together to look at, that shift in implementation.
And I don't think it's been said enough. We don't actually have spacing in the K through 3s or Mills Pond or Gibbons or high school to eliminate, to be 3 feet apart. So, when I'm asked that question from people, is there spacing for younger grades or older grades or whatever in our system? And my understanding is that not all 3 buildings, K through 3s, have spacing for 3-foot distancing.
There's variability. And again, there's different things we can do with programming. But I guess I would say this feels like a presentation and something we should do in a more thoughtful way than for me to start kind of spitballing ideas with you. I mean,
I'm only bringing up from a budgetary point of view,
Right. But now we're moving into programming discussions where I want to be, did you hear the superintendent said we're all coming back to school? Like, I just think we've learned that when we're doing open conversation like this, it will lead to confusion. But I certainly, let's stick to the budgetary implications. I'm right there with you. And I think as of now, unless they provide more COVID dollars, there's not going to be leverage to do something creative January to June because there's no funding available. So districts will be hamstringed against that. And everyone is screaming about the fact that they didn't extend the COVID CARES grant to let us expend post January 1. So, we'll wait and see what the new administration does. We'll wait and see if they get some changes. But unless that happened, we wouldn't have the financial leverage to do much creative changes.
So that's helpful. Thank you for mentioning that, because I think that's the piece. There's no COVID funding from January to June right now. And therefore, anything people talk about really is not a possibility because there are no dollars to expand that as of yet.
And I think we can continue to talk about what you hear people talking about and what they want. I mean, we're relying on the survey and other information, but the bottom line is, we'll make recommendations to you. You guys can pose questions to us, and that's a separate presentation. What we can do is ongoing updates. So thanks.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, do you want me to move to budget?
Yeah, sure. We can move to our next agenda item, discussion and vote of our 2021-2022 budget. So, we've had several budget presentations and discussions, and we're at our last school committee meeting where we will discuss and it's our turn to vote on and approve a budget that we will bring forward to our town manager and the select board, and ultimately to our Springtown meeting. So Amber, I'll have you share your highlights here, and also some feedback that you received at the Advisory Finance Committee meeting last Thursday.
Great. Can you guys see my screen? It's loading here stuff. Hold on. There we go. Is everybody good? So Irene and I presented to FinCom last week, and I know many of you observed that meeting. I want to say that they sent compliments and questions and in-depth discussion. I found it to be a really valuable meeting. I was really pleased with the depth of conversation and the questions, and I can hear in that committee over the years of presentation a better depth of understanding as they've all grown around their knowledge around Chapter 70 and the funding differences between what flows to the town, what flows to the schools, how Chapter 70 comes back. I mean, how circuit breaker comes back to us and the impacts of that funding. I also think they demonstrated a really great depth of information around the budget as we're presenting it. And again, it was a streamlined budget, which is kind of interesting. It's a more streamlined budget, so the conversations were really simpler. We weren't presenting increases based upon programming or staffing and then trying to, walk through ways we were managing shifting people on grants and stuff. So those are more complex presentations. So it gave us a little space, and I think was a really good discussion. The areas of focus, they looked a lot at our salary contract and wanted to understand the long-term impact of needing another substantial, or ongoing commitment to keeping our teachers in a competitive place. I think they recognized the commitment of this contract, bringing our faculty back to a closer target of communities in terms of like salary and competitiveness. And I think it spoke to their strong desire to keep the Westborough teachers that they feel do very good work for the community. And I felt good about that, as I think faculty did. And we looked at the impacts of the cuts and whether or not the additional cuts had taken too much, and whether they wanted an affirmation, the same thing you asked me, that we could provide an appropriate education next year to students given the budget we had presented. So those are the highlights. I guess I would skip through to share with you, sorry, I didn't take out these transitions. The meeting went well. I'm gonna hop around here. Oh, sorry. The parts that I wanna highlight to you really centered on the original discussion where the level service that we had originally had then changed when, just minimize this, sorry. Minimized this impact when we did the additional cut of the 400. So where we left our budgeting at the original change was that we had the impact of the circuit breaker gap, the salary of the Ks coming into the budget, and technology. And we then looked at this, and my original recommendation between the 5.6, which was a budget that just had salary and contract rollover, no new positions, no new additions, was that much higher because of those K positions coming into budget as anticipated, and also that percentage being higher against the lower starting place because of the $1.2 million cuts to the FY21 budget. From there, you know that we spent a lot of time reflecting on our collaboration with the town, our commitment to to the shared responsibility of keeping ourselves, in a place of fiscal responsibility with our fellow taxpayers at this level of community while maintaining strong services. We looked at the capital expenditures we knew were coming forward, town increases to budget needs they have, and the end of the emergency funds. All of this led us to a point where I really wanted to look at that strategically again. And I came back to you with a recommendation that in the short term, I want to reiterate again, and I did it at FinCom, within this short-term crisis phase, we could maintain making these additional cuts. And I'm going to just highlight these and I'll open it for discussion. We reduced summer programming after looking at the profile of several years and felt that while maintaining some funds so that we know we have strong capacity to program those who need extended programming, we could eliminate 24,000. The K tuition, we leveraged the last 126 and we moved an additional faculty over onto that grant. So we'll zero out the tuition and have 6 teachers that will come on in FY23, thus spreading out that impact. We have trash and phones and electricity level funded with a minor cut there. Our $30,000 furniture budget, we reduced it by 20, knowing that we'll just keep emergency furniture purchasing for next year. And we reduced the facilities account, and we had a revolving account that had been reducing over multiple years, which we would use for kind of a one-time opportunity to make a reduction to our budgetary request. From there, what that meant was that we were able to bring down the base cost of the kind of the level service budget to eliminate that 190,000. And we applied those reductions against the transportation cost, against the special education, that 100,000 that we knew was there. And you see that then the facilities went down an additional 30,000, keeping the overall impact to the salary impact of the Ks. And that brought us in at a 4.96% budget. And that represents the recommendation that I have before you tonight. And I would open it up to discussion so that we would be able to look at approval, I hope, of superintendent's recommendation for the FY22 budget that we would then carry forward to the town.
Thank you for the summary, and I will open it up to committee members who may have questions or comments to make about the budget as presented to be voted on tonight.
Yeah, I have a question. In reading Representative Hannah's email, there's another $130,000 coming from Chapter 70, and there could be additional money coming from circuit breaker, right, from the state?
Potentially. So the 130,000 will relate to salary offsets for the COVID impacts in FY21. That won't roll into FY22. That would be budgetary offset for this current fiscal year, is my understanding. And that would help us to reduce salary impacts to special education and the 15 positions that we've added to provide kind of this dual model, which is why you'll see Irene and I discussed that offset during the warrant article discussion that we will bring forward for the salary. And then I think that additional, I'll let Irene speak to whether or not we would receive additional circuit breaker funding. Again, that's always a moving target.
So as far as circuit breaker, it's, at this point, and, in talking with the state and what they have for calculations, it's very complex, and they're having a hard time gathering accurate statistics to bring forward. But I don't know. I mean, no one has the amount of circuit breaker increase or decrease at this point. So it's hard to budget based upon that leverage.
All right, thanks. The state circuit breaker fund, overall fund has increased, right? So potentially we could be getting potentially a higher return on that, right?
Well, it moves, for example, year over year. Sometimes you get a 75, like it's been as low as like 20% return on your estimated costs all the way up to 75 or 80. It's currently at 70. And so we've calculated the full expenditure that they've articulated they're committed to. And if that were to change, then that increase would be applied to our budget to provide some leverage against unexpected costs. We typically wouldn't come back and necessarily rebudget that in, but it depends on where we are with the overall budget. I mean, at this point, we monitor it and see where we end up.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I have some comments, I guess, not really questions. Well, I just want to thank Irene and Amber and Kristen and Steve and everyone who worked on the budget. I know it's a lot, and I know there's even more moving parts this year than any other years. And also FinCom and Hank and Beth on the committee too. So I see this budget as investing in three things, which we've talked about all along, no surprises: our people, our transportation, and our technology. So our people, I know we've had an unprecedented, crazy year, and I appreciate everyone doing all the work to bring a variety of learning experiences for all of our students. So this budget funds the staff and programming for when our students are hopefully all back in school full time. So we want kids to be in front of teachers, I think is our ultimate goal, my ultimate goal. So contractually, we committed to bringing our compensation, better in line with our surrounding comparable communities. And I think this year, more than any other year, everyone has earned that. And then this budget also funds for the kindergarten, which we talked about, and that was an equity issue. And I think that's even more exacerbated now with COVID. So I'm, glad to, the creative work that Amber and Irene have done to mitigate some of those impacts and spread them out over the years and just really make that happen. I think that was really important. We're investing in safety in our transportation. I don't think it's hard to realize now, but we have brand new buses. We have our, competent, dedicated drivers. And so maybe in the fall, we'll get that all rolling with everyone back on the bus. And technology. I know there's been a lot of debates lately about technology, for better, for worse, too much, too less. But technology has really been the only thing that's kept everyone together over the past 9 months and kept our learning progressing. So I think we, need to spend a little bit of money that you put in there for technology because we need to keep that infrastructure going. And then buildings, with our capital plan and the warrant articles, many districts weren't able to open up their buildings. So keeping, care and keeping our systems running is important also. So the COVID impacts will be with us for a few years. And if we take a slow and steady approach in line with what the town can handle, I think that's what we're trying to do. I think you guys did a good job of bringing that forward. I always like to put in a plug for town meeting, because we can all sit here and say, I think this budget is great, but that's where the real magic happens. So people need to show up for town meeting and participate and educate themselves and know that at town meeting, your vote counts. So we'll say that again and again over the next few months. But so in conclusion, I support this budget and thank you guys for all your work on it.
Sarah, well said.
So I just wanted to make a few comments. I don't think I have any questions at this point. I've been sort of examining our budget for the past 6 weeks. And but I wanted to make some comments. One, that if you're just seeing our budget for the first time tonight, that we had a public hearing. There's always a public hearing for our budget every single year that allows community members to speak up about it. That occurred 2 weeks ago, just to give people an idea. And at the same time, the Advisory Finance Committee reviewed it last week. I did get to see that meeting. You can always see it on the archives of Westborough TV. just to get a sense. But I wanted to thank Amber and Irene and Kristen and the whole team for really digging into this budget hard, because when I look at this, I think, how is it that we cut 1.2 million last year and that our increase is purely based upon those certain line items of salary, technology, pieces of kindergarten, when it seems like we're really on the slim side. So last time we met 2 weeks ago, my concern about a conservative, is it too conservative? Meaning that have we gone too far in cutting? And what will it do to the services and impact on our school community? I feel very confident, the response that Amber, that you've given, that it isn't too slim, but what it does require, and I think Hank said it best at the Advisory Finance Committee, that we're going to have to build back the reserves in the future. I think we have to make it very clear that we are at the bare bones, and the hard work that Irene has done and Amber have done to make sure that we come back with a conservative budget, allowing it to not have as great an impact upon our community and our taxpayers, needs to be very clear, so that when we come back next year and look at how far we've cut back, how we bring back the reserves, everything from, continuing to pay for the teacher's contract, the transportation, the buyback or the bring back of the rest of the teachers on the of tuition, the teachers. I'm specifically trying to say
The kindergarten really broken too. Yeah.
The kindergarten rollover from the revolving account is going to go into the budget. And even though we've talked quite extensively how those funds are going to come through Chapter 70 funding, and this was the first year that the state would bring over money through Chapter 70 funding for kindergarten to eliminate tuition kindergarten. That money will go into the general fund of the town, but that money that is for that program of kindergarten must go into our budget. So we are building that back into our budget, mainly starting next year. And so it should be an expectation. And then there was concern from the Advisory Finance Committee. I think it was Mike who talked about that if the state funds don't materialize, I think we have a pretty good sense of what to expect in terms of percentages. And I feel confident that what we believe will happen will happen. Everything from what we're getting out of the state at this point sounds like we can be fairly certain about certain aspects of our budget that feel dependable. So I didn't feel concerned about that as they were discussing it. And I think there was the usual, like we feel on the school committee, that the concerns we have about the impact upon town is always fresh in our minds as we're reviewing the budget. So I think this is a really solid budget. So I feel pretty good about it. I just wanted to mention that. And I think that Sarah covered quite a bit of it in terms of what is really in it and what do we really value right now, what is necessary in that budget. She reviewed really well. So thank you.
Steve, you have anything to share?
I guess just a philosophy. I think everybody has talked about the effort to come forward with a budget that's rational, reasonable, necessary, and set at a dollar value that we believe not only is necessary, but the town can afford. But the philosophical point that I want to raise is I think every family in the town knows now how important a functioning quality school system is to our way of life. I mean, when every family has to have somebody at home with the children who otherwise would be in school in order to more or less pay attention and self-educate them, even beyond the classes that they're taking on the computer, because that is the way life is right now. Bottom line is, it's a necessary factor in everybody's life so that people can go to work while the kids are in school. It's so important, as we now know, to the way we live in this country, that in fact a quality school system that provides the services that allows the parents to go to work, to exercise their own freedom during the school day. So, to that end, and if no one else has comments, I'd like to move the budget in the amount that was shown, and I believe that amount is $57,121,155.
I'll second that.
Thank you both. Any further discussion? All right, we'll take a roll call vote. We'll start with Sarah.
Dule, yes.
Raghu,
Nandan, yes.
Lisa,
Edinburgh, yes.
Steve,
Right, yes.
and Vincent, yes. 5-0. I'm pleased to see this budget passed by our school committee. And next steps will be to bring this to our town manager and our select board. And actually, Amber, that takes us right into our next agenda item, which is just to look at some important dates that are happening now between this vote and town meeting.
So thank you. I think it's important just to highlight that this is the start of a process, or, the continuation of a process. And I just want to say thank you for the approval of the budget and your ongoing, very focused work and comments and support. And I agree with Steve's comments about everyone recognizing the depth of importance of public education, and also for students' emotional well-being and for their part of their general wellness of development. We educate a whole child, and I think people are realizing that there's a piece missing for every child who's at home, even in a really wonderful, loving home and getting some online work and surviving this. There's a piece you can't fulfill that's part of helping children move into being part of a community and part of society and part of larger groups and working on independence and forging all those things that matter about becoming a highly functional, skilled, independent being. And I think that we see this in the sense of people's sense of loss for the part they can't give their child right now because we don't have them in school enough. So those are the things that I think, we all want to get back to this budget, I hope, representing a return to regular education in the fall. So I celebrate it because I'm hopeful that it marks a return to some normalcy in September, and we'll deal with the ramifications of needing to rebuild the operational budget. And I think it's important we don't use the word reserve. I want to be clear that we don't keep reserves. The operational cost of running the district, we cut over 150,000 of technology and other funds that are part of our operational functional budget. And those will need to be repaired, and we will take steps to do so. So thank you very much. Important dates that we need to hold on to. We have town meeting. It's kind of a mark your calendar and get yourself prepared kind of thing. We'll have town meeting is scheduled for March 13th at 1 o'clock. I think it's just important that we recognize that we're going to wait and see whether or not that gets pushed back to later in the spring. Last year it was a moving target. I also think that whether or not, we have future looks at where we are with the budget will again be maybe more of a live budget process. I'm hoping not. I mean, last year was grueling to keep revising. We certainly don't have anything else to cut. So the bottom line is we need to move forward to approve this budget. There's a date for January 28th. I'm going to ask you to hold it in your calendar. Last year we did the all-day meeting of all the boards, and there's hope that we might be able to gather virtually to provide that again, where we have an opportunity to make sure that we fulfill the charter, where we have an opportunity to present to the selectmen and share our budget and get their feedback and preparation for seeking their approval, which is an important part of the town meeting process. We will again continue to interact with FinCom if they ask us to return. They typically want us to return to discuss warrant articles, and then we maintain time with them So you're going to have dates where we'll return for warrant articles with FinCom. We don't have those yet. And we don't have beyond a tentative date of January 28th, a final plan for that, but I'd like you to hold it in your calendars. And then how we present the budget out in the community, I think Kristen and I are talking about some creative ways that we might use a live session with Westborough TV or a presentation that we then link and send to different organizations this year. So I'll return to that in January and we'll discuss how we want to provide updating the community on our budget. So for now, you need to know that you'll see other dates with FinCom. You'll see an opportunity for us to present to selectmen, if not at January 28th at another time, and then some form of presenting our budget to the community. You now become emissaries. This is your budget. You become the emissaries along with me of presenting it throughout the community. And I encourage all of you to use the tight talking points from the budget presentations to articulate to people the importance of, what this budget is and what it means for, coming to town meeting. I think those are the updates on timelines.
Yeah, that's great. And then I'll continue to remind the committee members about upcoming dates, and hopefully we can get a firm answer about January 28th and the schedule of that day. But that's important. That'll be important to do that again this year as well, to meet as a group and for the select board to be able to set aside that day to do all the meetings that they need to do as well. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, yep. Okay. Do you want to move on to the warrant articles?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I want to start, before I turn this over to Bob, there are a couple people you're going to hear from during this presentation phase. I want to thank Steve for his active participation in the Capital Committee. He's a vice chair for that committee and, is knowledgeable around the years of cycle on this process. And I think we held a productive meeting with Kristen and Irene and Bob and Kelly. So you have Kelly Giacopella and you have Bob Ferguson, who anchor our buildings and grounds department, and with their leadership, we have made tremendous progress towards improving our facilities and making repairs that had been long neglected. So this process is now the enhanced process, and we had a meeting with pulling them together, Steve and Kristen and I, to look at responding to the comments from Capital Subcommittee. So Steve has been at the committee. Bob and Kelly took the proposals forward. The committee then issued feedback, and then we met in a subcommittee, and tonight we have recommendations to you for modifications to our timelines for some articles and or proposals, and cost updates on the ones we want to move forward for FY22. So I guess at this point, I would leave Steve to comment as we go through. I think I'm going to let Bob present and Kelly present the updates of the 3 articles that received strong interest and I think a higher rating from the Capital Committee. And these would be updated and sent to them. And I'd like to turn it over to him so he could share that. You want to present, Bob?
Sure. Thank you very, very much for your comments, Amber. It's much appreciated. I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully everybody can see this. Everybody see that okay?
Yep, looks good, Bob.
Yep, we can see it. And we also received copies of this in our packet too, so everyone has the full document.
All right, so if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, I presented to the committee all of the 14 submittals, and we've pared it down to the 3 that I'm going to present again this evening based upon the feedback that we received from the subcommittees and the CIP committee and from Steve Durrett and from Amber and Irene and everyone else. So this first one here, I think perhaps I should defer to Steve if he doesn't mind, because this is the sprinkler project at the Hastings School. And if you remember, before we can do any work on the HVAC system upgrade, it's mandated by the rules and regulations of the building code and the fire department that the sprinkler system be installed at the Hastings School. So this is the one that had gone out for public bid twice. And the prices came back, almost double what the engineer's estimate was. And we had specifications and drawings that were suitable for public bid, and it did go out twice. So, this is going to be pushed forward another year or so. We can talk about that a little later on, Amber, if you'd like, or we can talk about the date that we're going to push this to now. Or Steve, if you'd like to comment on it, please do.
Well, just a recap on how we got to where we are and the fact that we went out to bid twice. When we made the modifications to Hastings School and made certain improvements under the state building code, if you spend a certain amount of money equal to a percentage of the total value of the building, you can make the renovation. But if you go over that amount of money, then you have to bring everything up to code. And so we spent as much as we could without having to change building code for the building at Hastings with the renovations that we did. We were told at the time that if we were to do any other modifications in the building, that the space would have to be sprinklered because it would have to be brought up to code. So a year and a half ago or so, we proceeded with the project. We had the scope of work defined in the drawings that Bob had mentioned, the specification as well. We had an engineering estimate from the engineer, and we went to town meeting and we got the amount of $760,000 voted, so that when we went to bid, we were chagrined by the result. Of course, what was happening at that time were that many schools in the Commonwealth were being out to bid at the same time. And so as a result of that amount of competition, this particular job was short shrifted, and we only got one bid. This was the result. So we felt at that time that we would, based on comments that we got from the one bidder, make changes to the program and to go out to bid again with the anticipation that we would see a reduction in what the total cost would be and hopefully bring us within the ballpark of what we had town meeting vote. Unfortunately, although the price came down a little bit, it didn't come down enough. So it's been sitting on the back burner until we could go back to town meeting to fund this. Now, last year we talked about transferring funds from those dollars that were left from the other project. We were stopped dead in our tracks from that concept. We had now have had turned, based on the last town meeting, over $2.5 million worth of funds that weren't needed for Armstrong and for Gibbons. And now we're going back to town meeting, following the rules, to try to get the balance of the money to do this. The plan would be that if the town meeting, if this warrant article goes forward between now and the time of town meeting, we will go out to bid again. And at that point in time, we would know exactly what the funds would be, and to that extent would then recommend to the town the true amount that would allow us to proceed with the project. Now, the dollar amount that we have here is based on bids that were received by other projects at that time. And we are in the middle of the road of those bids with the amount of money that would now total roughly $1,510,000. So the process is, in order to make any of the other improvements at Hastings, this needs to be voted. Now, you may recall the last town meeting, last annual town meeting, that we already have voted funds for the HVAC system at Hastings. If this project goes forward and it's funded, we can proceed with that project at the same time. And there is some economy of scale involved because we will have to remove the ceiling in many parts of the of the Hastings project, and we won't have to put it back twice. So that if we do the HVAC as well as this project at the same time, during the normal summer period, that there should be some economy of scales here. So it is at least my recommendation to the school committee, and I think Bob's as well, that we should present this article for consideration by the Capital Expenditures Committee to be funded at this upcoming annual town meeting. The discussions that we've had so far with the Capital Expenditures Committee is that they understand the sequence and the necessity to come up with this money so that we can do the other projects that are scheduled for Hastings. That's my story.
Thank you, Steve. I put up for everybody to see the recent bids that were provided by the engineer. And just in the square foot, money per square foot column, you can see the discrepancy between the bids. These are winning bids as we understand. So I just put that up for demonstration. They're kind of all over the place. So it's a very unpredictable world when you go out for public
So
bids.
as I said, we took the average between the high and the low to establish the amount of money that's in this warrant article, with the mechanism of going out to bid again and receiving those bids before town meeting would allow us then to adjust the article to the amount of money required.
Thank you, Steve. And then these other documents that are part of this document is the backup documentation that we promised that would, fill in for your benefit. So it's all part of the package. So I don't need to go through all of this. So I think that pretty much wraps up the sprinkler at the Hastings School. The next project that we're recommending is, of course, the which is kind of cut and dry. It's the 2 high school gym petitions. And we did receive the written, originally we had a rough order magnitude of 300,000, and remarkably, it did come back. The proposal came back at 297,805, which was basically what we anticipated, approximately 150,000 per gym. And this was the written proposal that we received from the vendor. And of course, as you know, this is just one written proposal. And if these monies are approved at that price, of course, we'll have to go out for public bid. And hopefully the bid amounts will come in accurately enough that we can award a vendor with this project. So before I move on, are there any questions on this one?
Bob, would you be able to go out to bid between now and the town meeting so that we would have firm numbers to discuss at town meeting?
Not really. We really are not supposed to go out to bid until the funds are allocated or appropriated for the project. That's part of the dilemma with public bidding.
We used to go out to bid with the caveat that that had to be funded at town meeting.
Right.
Yeah, I certainly believe we can, with the caveat that it would be, if funded, but we can talk about that, Bob, and see if possible.
Yeah, I mean, we can always do that. I
Yep.
I just, I don't know how much interest we can discuss that, and certainly we can do that before town meeting if that's the desire, if that's.
Yep.
That's not a hard one to put out for bid.
I think what's tough about this is that because the sprinkler system keeps coming back, we've had a couple of bids. I think that it sends a degree of, this inaccuracy of our estimates until we get there and then discover in that case, it wasn't enough. So I think in knowing the number before town meeting, it really helps the whole process so that people know exactly how much they're funding and why, and that it's a real number and not, what feels like an estimate, especially with this landscape of this increase that happens in different industries. And in this case, building or real estate or.
Well, let's put it this way. With respect to this particular one at 297,805, that's a firm price. That's a proposal from a company that I'm sure will bid the project when it goes out for public bid. So if somebody comes in lower, we know that the money that you're going to approve will be lower than what we're asking for now, because we're certainly not going to accept anything higher because we have this proposal in front of us at 297,805. Does that make sense?
Yes. So if there are types of articles that allow us to do that, that's great. It's just hard when there are different bids or different projects that don't allow us that it really becomes problematic.
Sure, yep, understood. So then the
Well,
backup,
the second part of it is, no, it has to be a competitive bid, and so let's do that. And let's find the number, and then when we go to town meeting, it isn't, you know, it may be 300,000, it may be 297,805, or it may be less than that. But the town
Exactly.
meeting does not vote a number if it turned in to be $50,000 less.
so here's the backup documentation for that particular sheet, the proposal that we received from the particular vendor that has been performing the maintenance over a number of years.
Bob, I have a question
Sure.
On the sprinkler. Actually, that's where the concern is. Can we, you know, we know there's the Papa's company, the incumbent gave us a number, and they're going to bid when we go to public bid for this project. But can we get something like that on the sprinkler one, a rough estimate kind of thing? Because you know, when you go out for projects,
No rough estimates. Speak to this. The Capital Expenditures Committee is not going to work with a rough estimate. I had suggested, Raghu, is that we're going to go out to bid, and we'll have a firm bid when we go to town meeting to consider to vote.
Well,
that would be the ideal situation.
yeah, we'll
Steve.
have an exact number.
yeah.
Yes, we will, definitely.
Then especially with the sprinklers, so that we have exact numbers that we can
Yes,
go to the
we
town
will
meeting.
definitely have a bid with an exact number when we arrive at town meeting on each of these. So we should be in good shape.
Yep, once we get the go-ahead on these three projects, we can put them out for bid, or at least these two. All right, so the last one is the girls or women's varsity softball field at the high school. And if you remember, I think we originally, you know, put in a price of 200,000 based on the conversations and meetings we had with a local engineering company and with our athletic director on several occasions. And we came up with, at the time, you know, it was a rough order of magnitude based on our discussions and some limited correspondence in writing from some of the vendors of 200,000. And, you know, it came in very, very close. We did go and backfill this particular sheet with the backup information and documentation. We did receive, you know, estimates from or proposals from some of the companies. I have received one as late as 4:30 this afternoon for the dugouts, for example, which came from Beacon Athletics out in Wisconsin. But in any event, we did backfill these. Fryer Engineering's proposal, his work, and I can go through the work again. And you got to remember that for this particular project, there's a lot of moving parts to a lot of pieces to the puzzle that, you know, if we were going to go and spend money with a professional architect and engineering firm, you know, that money wouldn't be going into the project. It would be going into, you know, designing it so that we can get a contractor to do everything in one ball of wax. Well, what we're doing here is we're relying upon several different entities to do the work basically in-house with the resources that we have and the contractors that have already bid through the town so that we can get this job done and put most of the money or all of the money, 100% of the money into the actual project rather than the engineering. But you have to remember that, you know, just the backstop alone here, as you can see, it's going to be a 20-foot backstop with a full canopy above, and it's got 5 posts. So for example, these 5 posts will need to have footings installed in the ground. And those are costs that, you know, an engineer would ordinarily plot out and draw. We don't need the engineering drawings to figure out what it's going to cost to do that. It'll be done on a time materials basis with the contractor in town at a cost saving. So that's our intent, is to do that.
So let me ask this question, Bob.
Yep.
So if you took those numbers that are there, I don't know, there's 5 or 6 different numbers. How many of those come off the state bid list versus how many of them are a single vendor that gave you a price?
Well, most of them are single vendors that gave us a price. You know, most of them under, you know, with the exception of the 68,000 here, you which is over 50,000. That's an awarded bid through the town DPW, as you know. But the rest of these, the concrete slabs, that'll be done under the DPW bid list as well. The 24,000 for the dugout, for the dugouts themselves, that's the Wisconsin company. It'll provide the 2 dugouts, which that's a 40-foot dugout on each side of the field. The dugout benches are another 4,800. That's the same vendor. Backstop material quotes were from Anthem Sports at 5,007, 5,276.10. And of course, as I mentioned, that doesn't include the footings and the work in installing it. That's just the materials. And then you've got the additional safety and perimeter fencing and installation, concrete footings and the slab and so forth for the dugouts. There's a lot of moving parts to it. The diamond needs to be removed and refurbished new. We have a quotation from Golf Management for approximately $30,000, which will include the installation of an irrigation system inside and outside the diamond and some replacement of grass and some drainage out in left field because it's wet. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we're looking to save as much money as possible for the town and do as much as we can with the money that we're going to be allotted.
Well, as I've suggested, the state requires that we bid every one of these items unless we have a state bid process that arrives at the value, let's say for, specific items, concrete offered by a vendor or something that's been defined and bid by the Commonwealth in lieu of the town. And so one of these things that doesn't come off of the state bid list, I believe you have to offer it for a competitive bid.
Well, you have to use best practices under $50,000, and for some of these items, you try and get 3 quotations for some of these items, like the prefabricated dugout assembly, the benches for the dugouts, the backstop. You go out and you try and get 3 bids for that. You solicit 3 bids under 50,000. So I think we're in good shape here as far as the state and the procurement laws. Like I said, the concrete slab, the concrete work and the footings and so forth, that's all bid through the DPW on a T&M basis. Hours of equipment. Go ahead, Amber.
I was just going to say, what we wanted was a tighter and clear cost estimate that was attached to conversations that broke it down like this, such that by the time you get out to going and getting your quotes on the different subparts of this, that you know what money you're working with, and that you're beyond a place of rough order of magnitude, and that you have workable quotes to develop. So other additional questions on this one?
I just want to point out, the alternative to this, the way we've approached this is, like I mentioned, would have to hire a professional architect engineer, put it all together in one bid package and put it out for bid. And I'm sure that price will come in a lot higher than what we're looking for here at 200,000 to 858,000.
Well, of course, one of the things you get when an engineer or an architect does it is you get project management. In this case, who's going to do that?
Well, I've been stuck with it on all the other projects, so I suppose I'd do it on this one as well.
So I think too, I think, Fryer takes responsibility to also coordinate the arrival against the work they do. We've had good experiences with their capacity to kind of manage pulling different groups in at the right time against a project implementation. So I certainly think that this one will require Bob to stay very close on.
Yeah, we've saved money with Fryer Engineering. They've done a terrific job. I love to give him a shout out because his company is phenomenal when it comes to, he's a taxpayer in town. He's very concerned about the budget like everyone else, and he does his level best to make sure he saves money and comes in under budget, and he has in every single instance. Even the one that we just did this past summer up in the upper parking lot, just like he did in the front of the high school a year or so ago. So, we've had good luck doing this, and the alternative would be to put it in a package and put it out for a general contractor to bid, and it'd be at a much higher cost. That's just reality.
Well, Well, I mean, not to show favorites, Fire Engineering is on the state bid list, has provided that bid to the state, and has done everything that he needs to. So it isn't favoritism here. It's, it follows bid laws, Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Absolutely.
And I agree, very good contract.
Yep. So these are the backup documentation that we did to fill the file here. This one was, like I said, from Fire Engineering, and then, golf course management. And then Anthem Sports was for the, for the backstop. And again, that's very deceptive when you look at the price for the backstop being $5,276. That's just the materials. It doesn't include, the grading and excavation and the pouring of the foundation footings for the 5 posts, or a crane. It'll be necessary to have a crane in there to lift the pieces into place. It'll have to be assembled and put together by a fence company. There's a lot involved here beyond the $5,276. I want you to recognize that. And then these are just the drawings. This is what the backstop will look like. It's the 20-foot backstop with a full canopy. And then installation instructions. So it's just the documentation, kind of a backup for the form. And that's basically it for the 3.
Thank you. So just to add a couple comments as well, I mean, I think what's going to end up happening is that the other projects that we maintain, the 14 package of a rotation of meaningful maintenance and project pieces that need to be performed across the 6 schools will bump to other places in the long range planning. And I'm certainly comfortable after Steve and returns to the Capitol meeting tomorrow and sees how things proceed. We'll give you an update at the next meeting where we could look at the 5-year rotation and show you how we'll be shifting some of those things around. But that becomes an annual process now for us. I think it would be premature to delineate those to you now as falling in a certain spot. But what's important is to say those don't go away. They get shifted against our priorities and managed against the capital process that's evolving. So as of now, these represent the projects that would come forward, and Steve will hear the discussion at Capitol and it will run its completion. And then we'll return at our next meeting, probably in January, and provide an update on implementation of how those other projects will evolve over more multiple years. Other comments or questions from people? And then I guess we would be seeking a vote to approve these to move forward to Capitol as presented after any other, or you could vote, you could move the motion and then discuss further if you need to.
I move that we approve the 3 warrant articles as presented in the amounts that have been discussed.
This is
I'll second
Cheryl.
it.
Oh, thank you, Reagan. You got it.
Thank you both. Any further discussion on these? So just to summarize that, we're bringing these 3 capital improvement plans forward based on feedback that we received from the Capital Expenditures Committee in order to continue the process of moving through that.
And then ultimately that committee decides what goes to town meeting, right?
Well, it's not exactly clear how this works, but my assumption is that by virtue of doing this through the Capital Expenditures Committee, that the Capital Expenditures Committee itself will now stand for these items that will be in the alphabet soup article, which is frequently funded from free cash and therefore not an impact in the current year for the taxpayer. Different than, say, a standalone warrant article, which I think we will also have asking for refunding of money committed for excess COVID costs as well, the salaries.
Yeah.
So that's a That's a school committee article going into the warrant sponsored by the school committee. These three, I believe, if they are accepted by the Capital Expenditures Committee, will go into the as offered by the Capital Expenditures Committee.
And then we would present, I agree, that's how it's emerging. And I think in some years, there will need to be more conversation. I think we've adjusted our practice such that we'll come together in August and do more in-depth planning in a subcommittee like this with Steve and the chair of the school committee to really walk through things and map it out and to provide, you know, fully prepared documentation to bring to Capitol, working kind of as we did the other day. But I do think that some years there'll be more conversation than others to defend ones we think need to come forward, because they have to follow. I think over time, the cycle will even out with the long range planning kicking in. So I think it looks good in terms of this first year. And then the second article, when you finish this, we'll do that next.
Yep. Any other questions or discussion?
I'm glad these projects were selected. I mean, especially the high school gym one that had to be done yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a safety concern. I'm glad these were the right three projects to be selected going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good. All right.
Just to reiterate again, you know, those high school petitions, we have had the vendor in to maintain them all along, you know, for safety reasons. And the concern again is that those petitions are now at a point where the vendor is really not willing to take on the liability associated with continuing with maintaining those petitions. So we're kind of up against a hard rock and we have to replace them. So that's where we're at. And that's the right thing to do. Thank you.
All right. I think we're ready for our roll call vote. So we'll start with Sarah.
Abdullah, yes.
Rego.
And then yes.
Lisa.
Edinburgh, yes.
Steve.
Correct, yes.
And Vincent, yes, 5-0. So we'll take these updated plans and bring them to the assistant town manager to pass along to the Capital Committee and get those back into the process. So thank you, Bob and Kelly, both for your work on this and getting all of these numbers for us. We appreciate it.
Not a problem. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can't wait to get started on them,
So,
which will be sooner rather than later. If we're going to bid them, you know, before town meeting, we'll have to get on.
exactly.
Sure.
Thank you so much. You guys can tap out if you want, because
All right. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
So the next one is a discussion around a warrant article that we will forward for the exposure on salary budget not available that's for the COVID-based coverages. So I'm going to open up that article. If you can pull that one up, Daniel. So when we did our plan where we had to run dual platforms, and like many districts have done exactly the same thing, we've needed to hire additional staff in order to provide in-person and remote at the same time. We also had a whole variety of staffing changes and other things that happened due to being in a pandemic. So there's been a lot of staffing necessary. So the article as it stands, again, we have the 102 article, which Irene said she fully expended, and any other additional costs move on to the CARE grant for any salary expenditures related specifically to COVID hires are covered for the September salary up until December 31st. But looking from July 1st from January 1st through to June at the end of the year, you have uncovered salary cost for those 15 positions and a couple other positions related to tutors and a long-term sub that needed to be hired to provide additional coverage for remote over at Mill Pond. So currently the article would request that we would seek a vote for transfer from free cash to appropriate the sum of $421,000, which would cover the cost for salaries for COVID-related expenditures of unanticipated staffing needs through the end of the year. We're certainly incredibly hopeful that what will happen is that we'll see an increase in COVID-based funding that would allow us to, if we were fortunate, arrive at town meeting with this being a reduced article or a Passover article. It would be very advantageous if, they kept the unexpended funds for the CARES Act to roll forward or made other funds available. So right now, Irene and I spent all day, this very tiny article, this very tiny bit of wording took more than several full days. The 421,000 represents the 15 positions plus 2 tutors and a long-term sub that are needed, as well as $30,000 of special education instructional coverage that needs to occur after that would need to occur after the January break. Now, that would actually bring this article up to almost 600,000. We're anticipating the 130,000 that Raghu mentioned that would be coming from the state would cover a couple key expenditures that don't need to go into this amount. There's $95,000 of some additional staffing, the 2 tutors, and an additional long-term sub 5th grade teacher through the end of the year, from January to the end of the year, that we would use that 130,000 to offset. And the 30,000, it's like $29,964 for the staffing necessary to run the 2 weeks in person for students of high need that need to come back while other people are in remote. So the 130 would offset those costs, and it comes to like 127 something to cover those costs. And we'll anticipate, fingers crossed, that those funds will come through and be leveraged for us. And it looks like they are. They've delineated it. It's who's going to be in charge of sending it to us right now that they're debating whether it comes from DESE with strings attached or not. So right now we maintained this warrant article at the 421 because that represents the 15 positions that we know of that we've paid the first half of the year, and that will cover us from January 1 to June. So that's where things stand. And, I've been transparent. I was at FinCom about this. They hadn't seen the anticipated amount. I said it out loud. And so as of now, and I hope, Raghu, that answers your question about how we'll leverage that 130,000 for direct salary expenditures to support student learning. And then this would be the additional amount. And I would open it up for discussion. It's kind of direct.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to bring this forward. And I think that there's always a hope that there would be other funding coming from the federal government or the state government. So there's always a hope that we could just pull this article because we got funding somewhere else. So I think this is our worst case scenario, that we have to go to town meeting and ask for this to be funded. But we always have our fingers and toes crossed that, a new federal administration may provide some more of these federal grants like we saw at the beginning of the year, or some additional funding that could help, mitigate this or take care of it. So yeah.
It's certainly not, I want to be clear, it's not unique in the sense that the federal government and the state government, they're hearing this exact discussion, which is that the COVID-based emergency funding, in the way that fiscal budgeting works, where we are on a different cycle than they are, that just abruptly stops, in the middle of our fiscal year, leaves districts really compromised with the things they were able to place against the grant. And so I think that they're definitely getting an earful that there's a whole second half of salary-based expenditures that people are compromised on. I think in Westborough, our response to this is to put an article forward to anticipate needing to do those coverages, and we'll be tracking every offset we can against any funding they give us.
Yeah, I just heard the $900 billion that was approved did not have any money for towns and states and towns.
I think it's going to go directly to businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely not alone in this. Every school district is facing some expenditures that were not budgeted for.
So there's more discussion here, and I can see people's wheels turning. We will be, and this is the part that, I want to be transparent. We will also be sitting down to budget various case scenarios of, not receiving funding and pull back expenditures that have to be pulled back such that we can commit to that salary, because those people are here, they're hired, and they need to perform the services, and they get paid on a regular cycle. So we're going to have to pull in a planned set of funding offsets until we receive relief from town meeting. So there's multiple moving pieces. This is the fiscal year we're currently in. So the first piece is to forward this article. If we came into some range of fiscal crisis that somehow, we can't get any additional funding, we don't have an offset that makes sense, I would be back in front of you requesting a special town meeting call for that expenditure. We would go to FinCom and look for the offset from them. So we have started to plan for how to manage moving forward till town meeting. But we also know that if town meeting then gets deferred, that becomes problematic. So again, there's a range of really complex things going on here. But the most important thing is to transparently prepare with town meeting such that this warrant article comes forward as the most important first step.
And Amber, should we vote our approval of bringing this forward, or is this just?
You need to vote it, because I want to send it forward. So I would be asking for your vote of approval to forward this as a warrant article for annual town meeting.
Yes. So is there a motion for this?
I'll move the motion to approve this warrant article to move to the town meeting.
Yeah.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Sarah?
Delay, yes.
Raghu?
Nandan, yes.
Lisa?
Edinburgh, yes.
Steve?
Right, yes.
And Vincent, yes. So 5-0 approved to bring this salary funding to cover COVID-19 salaries forward.
All right, so January will continue to be busy, but thank you very much.
Great, okay, glad we got that done. We have one other agenda item, and it's looking at an update to policy JIH on searches and interrogations. And again, I want to thank Andrea Macknick for all her work in organizing our policy review and keeping track of this important work. So this is just one policy that MASC had shared with us some updates to this policy. And when the policy subcommittee met, we weren't comfortable with the mask updates and thought it needed more language around it. And we were kind of playing around with it and decided to reach out to legal counsel to really make sure we get this right. And so Andrea reached out to John Foskett, and he did agree that the MASC suggested changes from MASC didn't feel solid enough. And so he crafted an update for us, which is the red line, the text that you see in the current policy. So if we're comfortable on voting this through tonight, we can, or if committee members want to review it, we can vote it in at our next meeting. Again, the reason this one didn't come forward at our last meeting is just because we wanted legal counsel to give us advice on how to word this.
I mean, I think I certainly, if you guys want to approve it, but I also think it's okay for us to take it as a first reading and give you time to look at it. It's an important policy adjustment, and I think it follows practice, but I think you should be comfortable. And Kristen and I, we didn't talk about this ahead of time, sorry. But I do think doing it as a first reading makes sense, because then we've got time to reflect on it, and you can bring it back and we can approve it early in the next meeting with any modifications or updates. But I think it's a sound revision, but it it's an important policy and you might want to give it another look.
Yeah, sure. So why don't we do that? We will just see this as a first read, and then we will put it on the agenda for our meeting in January, our first meeting in January, and be able to take a vote on that. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it gives us time to forward questions and for them to read it and to contact us. And then if we need to get clarification from our legal counsel, we can.
Sure. Lisa, did you have a question?
I'd like to read it through the lens of equity. You know, since the climate study or survey came out and thinking about some of those issues, I guess I want to read it with that lens on, and I didn't yet. And so I would love to review it more.
Sure. And if anyone, if you're thinking about this or looking into it and have questions, we can certainly reach out again to legal counsel again to get clarification or, answer questions. Great. Okay, so we will let that sit and everyone has homework now to look that over and think about it. All right, as a reminder, the next meeting of the school committee will be on Wednesday, January 6th, 2021 at 6 p.m. And on behalf of the school committee, we hope that everyone has a safe and joyous holiday season. We're wishing our staff, students, and families and our entire Westborough community good health and lots of happiness in the new year. So is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Come on.
I was waiting for Steve.
No one even tries to adjourn because it's Steve's call.
Steve's. Is there a second?
I did, didn't I?
Yeah,
Yes.
you did.
Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll do a roll call vote to adjourn. Sarah,
Julia, yes.
Raghu,
Nandan, yes.
Lisa,
Edinburgh, yes.
Steve,
Yes, Durant, yes.
and Vincent, yes. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Happy
Good night.
New Year.
Happy holidays to everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Happy holidays.